worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come. Come, come, whoever you are. Wander, worshiper, lover of leaving. Ours is no caravan of despair. Come yet again, come.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane. I am Lisa Conger, your worship leader this morning. We're glad to have you here with us. UUCS is a very welcoming congregation, and we appreciate your unique backgrounds, beliefs, and lifestyle. If you're one of our longtime members or have been here for a short time, or if you're joining us today for the first time, we're glad to have you. Welcome to everyone here and to all those who are streaming with us this morning. It is our mission to join together to create a nourishing, liberal religious home and to champion justice, diversity, and environmental stewardship in the wider world. Or in short, to create community, find meaning, and work for justice. Before we turn to one another to greet each other, I would like to briefly introduce our guest speaker, Dr. Paul Lindholdt. He's a church member, and he will be gifting us with poetry, a subject very dear to my heart. Please take a few moments and greet one another. Don't be shy. Please say hello to someone you haven't met yet. Thank you. We'll have more time to greet one another after the service and to share our stories during social hour. We now turn from our informal greeting of one another to formally begin our service by lighting our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, the symbol of our unity and solidarity, of our openness and inclusion, of our community and individual uniqueness. May this small flame be our offering of warmth to those who are cold and alone, and a light to those in darkness. May it be a flame that ignites justice in the world and a beacon of hope to those in need. And may it reflect at least a spark of truth wherever truth has been lost, and cast a healthy shadow of doubt where it has been found. I believe in the power of poetry for healing, growth, inspiration, and the commemoration of what we hold dear. For me, writing poetry is a way to process what I'm thinking and feeling, and it always teaches me something. Here are a couple of definitions of poetry that I'd like to share with you. The first is by John G. Stackhouse. Poetry condenses, compacts, crystallizes experience and insight. The best poetry is translucent, prismatic, kaleidoscopic. It lets light in and then splits it up, plays with it in order to reveal something of the world previously unnoticed or insufficiently celebrated or inadequately mourned. And this from poet Gary Snyder: poetry is a tool, a net, or a trap to catch the present, a sharp edge, a medicine, or the little awl that unties knots. Our guest speaker, Dr. Lindholdt, has made a life in poetry. It is a love of his, as it is mine. He will be sharing his poetic insights as well as some poetry with us this morning during his sermon.
Well, I had a lot of fun this last week looking through our hymnal because we have, of course, a lot of the hymns we sing are actually poems. They're poems first, and then somebody sets them to a tune. And that's true of our opening number is part of a poem. And also this one, I remember studying Eleanor Fargen when I was a kid in school. And this poem is by her, but you may associate it with Cat Stevens, who popularized it in the 60s with his rendition of it. So we are going to sing Morning is Broken. Please rise as you're willing and able. A little faster. Morning has broken like the first morning. Blackbird has spoken like the first bird. Praise for the singing, praise for the morning, praise for them springing fresh from the word. Sweet the rain's dew fall, sunlit from heaven, like the first dew fall on the first grass. Praise for the sweetness of the wet garden, sprung in completeness where God's feet pass. Mine is the sunlight, mine is the morning, born of the one light, Eden so play. Praise with elation, praise every morning, God's recreation of the new day.
Each time we gather as a congregation, there are always those who are with us in our hearts and minds and who we want to wrap in our love and care. We kindle light this morning. Oh, okay, he's quicker on the draw. For all those living with the tension between Russia and Ukraine, and for all those who have been touched by COVID, let us share a moment in silence, embracing others who are here in our hearts this morning. You are welcome to say their names aloud as you are willing. Those named aloud and those remembered in the silence, and all those who are suffering elsewhere in our world this hour, we hold in our community of compassion. We now gratefully give and receive this morning's offering, which sustains this community and its mission for the larger world.
All right, story for all ages. If you care to come up front, you can see the drawings of Shel Silverstein from the book, but I can share that with you later. From Falling Up, a poem I used to enjoy reading with my young, rough and tumble son. He could relate to the furniture bash. The hand of the clock pinched the foot of the bed, so the foot of the bed kicked the seat of the chair, so the seat of the chair sat on the head of the table, so the head of the table bit the leg of the desk, so the leg of the desk bumped the arm of the couch, so the arm of the couch slapped the face of the clock. And they pinched and they punched and they banged and they knocked and they ripped and they flipped and they rolled and they rocked, and the poor dresser drawer got a couple of socks. There was sawdust and springs when I turned on the light after that horrible furniture fight. And that's the truth, no lie, no joke. And that's how all your furniture got broke.
Thank you, Dan. That was wonderful. Let us shift our attention now to a time of meditation. I invite you to find a relaxed, receptive posture, to close your eyes if you wish, and to take a couple of deep breaths as I begin with this little poem I wrote entitled, A Poem. A poem is a paper enchantment performing a certain magic that can pierce the heart and soul to heal and make whole. guest, Paul Lindholdt, is a professor of English at EW and the author of multiple books, including Making Landfall poems, which is available at the back after the service. Welcome, Paul.
Good morning, you in the pews and you on Zoom. This week I spent some time with some folks who were raised in the Catholic Church, and I described for them our sermons for this month while Todd's on sabbatical, and they came away cross-eyed from my recitation of the different topics that they'd be hearing, and I thought I would remind you of who our guest speakers are and what they're talking about. One of them is my colleague, Dr. Ed Burns, who's speaking about police accountability with a special emphasis on racial disproportionality in searches and seizures. Another speaker is the Reverend George Taylor, who was arrested quite deliberately as a form of protest against the oil trains and coal trains that come through Spokane because he believes they are impediments to our efforts to prevent climate change. And a third speaker is Jerry White, the Spokane Riverkeeper, who's talking about the 40th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. And then poetry by me today. And so it astonished these Catholics that we would have these sorts of topics in our pulpit in this church, but it makes me very proud. Poetry, to address my question that forms a title for this talk today, what is poetry good for? Poetry is good for many things. It is polyvalent, but I'm going to focus in particular on three of those things. It delights, it instructs, and it heals. It does that by means of images, those word pictures which speak to our five senses. One of the poems I will begin with is by an obscure German-American poet named Francis Daniel Pastorius, who lived in Pennsylvania. And this one, as you can tell, is very instructive, if not didactic. It's untitled. The hours for sleep I thus prefix: to students 5, to merchants 6, to travelers I do grant 7, to sluggards 8, to fools 11. So I give that with a scowl because that's what I hear between the lines of that poem. He's prescribing how many hours of sleep you're allowed. One of my close friends, when I gave him that poem years ago, said, well, that puts me somewhere between a sluggard and a fool, I reckon. All of us are hardwired to love poetry, I argue, because we all are products of Mother Goose. We all heard nursery rhymes when we were kids. In certain moods, I could argue that Mother Goose is the greatest poet of all time. But of course, Mother Goose is just an invention. She's really a receptacle for all of the traditional poems that have come down throughout the ages. But I'm going to begin with some Mother Goose for you here. Mother Goose delights, above all. You know the Simple Simon saga. There are many poems in it. I give you at least one of them now. Simple Simon went to see if plums grew on a thistle. He pricked his fingers very much, which made poor Simon whistle. Whew. I think I need to give another one that you'll know more often. Simple Simon met a pieman going to the fair. Said Simple Simon to the pieman, let me taste your wares. The pieman said to Simple Simon, first let's see your penny. Said Simple Simon to the pieman, indeed, I have not any. So we delight, cruelly perhaps, at the naivete of poor Simon. Another favorite of mine from the Mother Goose series is Sing a Song of Sixpence. Everybody knows this, but I want to give it to you again because it's been decades since you've heard it, I suspect. And many people will sing it, but I'm not going to do that. Sing a song of sixpence, pocket full of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Wasn't that a dainty dish to set before the king? The king was in his counting house, counting out his money. The queen was in the parlor, eating bread and honey. The maid was in the garden, hanging up her clothes, when along came a blackbird and snipped off her nose. I love that poem, and I use it in my introduction to poetry classes because it's deeper than it appears. The pocket full of rye that opens the poem is the maid's. She has gone to market to buy the flour to bake the pie that the royalty has demanded of her. This is before bags and sacks, so you couldn't carry home your flour in those. She put it in her pocket and come home with it. The blackbird avenges its clan upon her, its entire clan, by snipping off her nose. At its core, then, the poem is one of social stratification and injustice, because the greedy king and the gluttonous queen get off scot-free, and their maid takes the brunt of their blame. Another one, Humpty Dumpty, has a shadow text, has a shadow message. It's a poem about social justice. It should remind us of the crooks, Huey Long of Louisiana and President Richard Nixon, because their cracked administrations could not be repaired. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. You don't have to accept that it's an allegory for fallen administrations, but it's one theory about the poem. A number of poems blur their audience line. They are meant for kids, but they delight adults in the process. And I want to give you one now titled The Reason for the Pelican. My mother-in-law loves this and had me videotape it so she could keep it on her phone. The poet, John Ciardi, had a unique gift. He had something called a sonnet machine. And so he would stand before a crowd like I'm doing, and he'd say, "Give me a topic." And somebody would shout out a topic, and he would, on the cuff, invent a sonnet, a perfect 14-line iambic pentameter with rhymes, and spew it out to the audience. I wish I had that gift. But I can remember his poem, The Reason for the Pelican. The reason for the pelican is difficult to see. His beak is clearly larger than there's any need to be. It's not to bail a boat with. He doesn't own a boat. Yet everywhere he takes himself, he has that beak to tote. It's not to keep his wife in. His wife has got one too. It's not a scoop for eating soup. It's not an extra shoe. It isn't quite for anything. And yet you realize it's really quite a splendid beak in quite a splendid size. John Ciardi, The Reason for the Pelican. Some of the poems that come down to us throughout the ages are religious. In fact, I think religious poems are probably at the top of the categories of the many poems we know. They instruct readers in religious faith. One of those is John Donne, who is a contemporary of Shakespeare. He was a high church clergyman. His speaker in these 4 lines, this quatrain, his speaker of those invites pain. It's a peculiarity of our predecessors in the faith circles that some of them love to imitate Christ by receiving pain, inviting pain, like these lines suggest. Batter my heart, 3-personed God, for you as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, overthrow me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. It's a little perverse for us Unitarians that other people would love to meditate on pain, but that's what some of them did centuries ago. Jesuit priest Gerard Manley Hopkins, one of my very favorites, also wrote a sonnet series like that John Donne lines are from. Some of you might recall God's grandeur from school. It is both ecological and religious. Here goes, God's grandeur. The world is charged with the grandeur of God. It will flame out like shining from shook foil. It gathers to a greatness like the ooze of oil crushed. Why do men then now not heed his rod? Generations have trod, and all is seared with trade, bleared, smeared with toil, and wears man's smudge, and shares man's smell. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. And for all this, nature is never spent. There lives a dearest freshness deep down things. And though the last light off the black west went, oh, morning at the brown brink eastward springs, because the Holy Ghost over the bent world broods with warm breast and with, bright wings. Gerard Manley Hopkins, God's grandeur. It is both ecological and religious. The soil is bare now, nor can foot feel being shod. Now, this poem was written in the 1880s before people were tuned into environmental wreckage, so he's a little bit of a prophet in that sense. I had the great pleasure of studying under Annie Dillard, who had us read that poem aloud as a class of 30 students and stamp time to this meter and raised the roof on that classroom in Fairhaven College at the time. After religion, the most popular topic is love in all languages. And I give you one now by the very, very popular Russian poet named Yevgeny Yevtushenko. Yevtushenko would draw in as many as 10,000 people to his readings. It's a time when poetry had much more luster than it has today. So this poem is titled Waiting. My love will come, will fling open her arms and fold me in them, will understand my fears, observe my changes. In from the pouring dark, from the pitch night, without stopping to bang the taxi door, she'll run upstairs, through the decaying porch, burning with love and love's happiness. She'll run dripping upstairs. She won't knock. She will take my head in her hands, and when she drops her overcoat on a chair, it will slide to the floor in a blue heap. That poem has always stuck with me because of that final image of the raincoat sliding to the floor in a blue heap. It's reminiscent of the films from the time, the 50s and 60s when he wrote it, where it was impolite to focus on lovers in a clutch, much less in bed. You rather looked at the garment that was discarded there. Love that poem, great love poem. My favorite poems, though, those I teach most often, are ecological. That's my favorite research topic, is the ecological. And so I give you now one by the poet Howard Nemerov, who was the brother of the American photographer Diane Arbus. And the poem is titled The Distances They Keep. In this poem, the title refers to birds. It's a poem about birds. They are with us always, but they have the wit to stay away. We are walking through woods. A sudden bush explodes into sparrows. They show no desire to become our friends. So also with the pheasant underfoot in the stubble field, and lazy lapwings rise to give their slow, unanimous consent. They want no part of us. And who can blame them, considering the feathers in our caps, that they are mistaken in the distances they keep? Still, the heart goes out to them. Goes out, and maybe it's better this way. Let them stay pieces of world we're not responsible for, who can be killed by cleverness and hate, but being shy enough may yet survive our love. And the final line of that poem is the one that struck me, that caused it to memorize itself in me. A love so powerful that also all you can do is survive it. Another foremost function of poetry is to heal. It's commonly called self-help or self-care, and there are many dozens, if not hundreds, of poets throughout all the ages and all of the ethnicities that have presented to us self-help and self-care poems. I call it religion for the irreligious, these sorts of poems. I give you one now by the Persian poet Rumi. In Persia today is Iran. Rumi wrote, in an elaborate analogy, "This human being is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness, some unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Be grateful for whoever comes. Each has been sent as a guide." Another self-help poet is the Austrian Rainer Maria Rilke, who wrote, "So you must not be frightened if a sadness rises up before you, larger than any you have ever seen. If a restiveness, like cloud shadows, passes over your hands and all you do. Something is happening to you. Life has not forgotten you. It holds you in its hand. It will not let you fall." Rainer Maria Rilke. And my favorite of all the self-help poets, perhaps because she wrote in English and I can more easily remember her stuff, is Mary Oliver, Pulitzer Prize winner, National Book Award winner, died in recent years, great loss to American literature. Her Wild Geese, which I give you now, soothes us by integrating readers and listeners with nature. Wild Geese. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees through the desert for 100 miles repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscape over the mountains and the rivers, the prairies and the deep trees. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. Mary Oliver, Wild Geese. And my final poem, a meditative pagan prayer of sorts, is by my very favorite poet, shy of Shakespeare. Wallace Stevens is his name. This is a fragment from his Notes Toward a Supreme Fiction. Two things of opposite natures seem to depend on one another. As a man depends on a woman day on night, the imagined on the real. This is the origin of change. Winter and spring cold copulars embrace, and forth the particulars of rapture come. Music falls on the silence like a sense, a passion that we feel, not understand. Morning and afternoon are clasped together, and north and south are an intrinsic couple, and sun and rain a plural, like two lovers that walk away as one in the greenest body. In the solitude, the trumpets of solitude are not of another solitude resounding, A little string speaks for a crowd of voices. The partaker partakes of that which changes him. The child that touches takes character from the thing, the body it touches. The captain and his men are one, and the sailor and the sea are one. Follow after, O my companion, my fellow, myself, sister and solace, brother and delight. Thank you.
And the sung poem that we will end with is from William Blake. And in fact, I thought of this poem because Bill Hauff, our minister emeritus, took the title of his book from this poem. And his book was called Infinity in the Palm of Your Hand. The melody that we sing it to is by Edvard Grieg. It's a short poem. I'm going to have Mara play it through, and then we will sing twice through these lyrics. Please rise as you're willing and able. To see the world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour. To see the world in a grain of sand, and a heaven in a wildflower, hold infinity in the palm of your hand, and eternity in an hour.
Well, I think we've experienced a feast of words and sound and images. As we travel into this week, I invite each of you to look for poetry, listen for poetry, or create some poetry. May poetic blessings guide you and bring you hope and beauty. Amen. Blessed be. Salam aleikum and shalom.
Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom, Shalom Haverim, Shalom Haverim, Shalom, Shalom.
Isn't it beautiful? Yeah.